We are delighted to welcome to Reedwood Friends, Candace Love. Candace was up until 2 weeks ago, did you say, officially?
Actually,
This week.
Last week.
Vice principal at Jefferson High School, and has now moved to Clackamas High School.
Correct. As of next week.
Okay.
So next week, coming up, or this week, I don't know how y'all do this. So this week coming up, I've given myself 5 days off for the transition, because when you're going from one culture to the next, you need a little bit of processing time.
Candace, tell us a little bit about your time at Jefferson, how you ended up there, where you're from, so give us a little background.
So first of all, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I am a native of Portland, Oregon. I lived in North Portland my whole life until I became an adult, and then I kind of moved over out into the Park Rose area, which is the outer northeast area. And so, and then my career started in actually Beaverton School District. So I became a teacher, social studies. I taught econ and government and just all of those areas, U.S. history, APUSH, which is Advanced Placement U.S. History, at Westview High School, which is kind of borderline of Hillsborough. And then I went from there I remember I was there for 4 years, and then I transitioned over to Centennial High School. And at the time I was at Centennial High School, well, let me go back to Westview. When I was at Westview High School, I actually was the only African-American teacher in the building. And that school hosted 3,000 students. It was right after the school was built, fairly brand new. And that was an interesting experience. And then when I transitioned over Centennial High School, which is in Gresham on 181st and Division, between Division and Powell, I was there, and I was the only African-American teacher there. So that was interesting. And what's interesting is my daughter, who's here today, her name is Destiny. She now is a receptionist at Centennial High School, and the demographics have changed from when I was teaching. So when I was teaching, most of the families' socioeconomic status and race were white and upper middle class. Now that she's there, it's changed. Now it's more of a median to low socioeconomic status, and it's becoming more diverse. Probably about 25% is now students of color. We're starting to see that actually across not only the nation, because they've been talking about how minorities are going to become the majority for a long time. I remember when my husband was in the master's program over at Concordia University, they were talking about it in the 90s, saying that by 2050, we're going to see racially minorities become the majority. And we're starting to see how those dynamics, those racial and cultural and economic dynamic changes are creating some challenges, some tension, some breakdowns in how do we now teach in a world that looks very different from yesteryears. And then when I moved from Centennial, we had I don't know, some of you might remember this, but we had a recession in 2008. You know, it hit really bad in 2008, and they hung on to me as long as they could. And then they did what is called a rift, and that means when they let teachers or staff go because of budget woes. And so I was brought into a room, it was about 35 of us, and they were like, we just don't have the budget, due to the economic crisis that we were in, and that happened in 2010. Of course, in 2009, I remember that the most, because that's when Michael Jackson died. And I was in the classroom, and I was like, there's no learning that's gonna happen right now. With Michael Jackson dying, literally the news was said at school, and everybody said, there's no learning that's gonna happen. And then I said, oh yes there is. It's just how you deliver that learning. So instead of focusing on the content that I had for that day, I now made the content relevant to what was happening in real life. And so then I took that Michael Jackson death and turned it into life in the content. And it's kind of going back to what we talked about, some of the things that were mentioned today. A lot of people said some things that I thought was very interesting, but we will go there later. But then I moved to Reynolds High School District. And when I moved to Reynolds High School District, I now took off the teacher hat, although I still have it on. But the role of a teacher switched, and I became Dean of Students. And that's the one who primarily handles discipline. And that was a whirlwind, because the principal who hired me in August suddenly, out of nowhere, and surprised everybody, resigned in December. So then I went from being a dean to now becoming an assistant principal. And that was in 2013, and I've been an assistant principal as far as that role since then. And so that's kind of been my journey, and I was at Reynolds High School for 6 years. Then I moved from Reynolds School District to Jefferson High School. And how I got there is very interesting, because I did not apply for that job. I just got a call out of the blue. It was a voicemail that was left. I'm at work, come home, there's this voicemail saying we have this opening, and I'm like perplexed because I did not, apply for it. And I called them back and I was like, yes, I'm hearing there's interview for a job. And they were like, yes, it's Portland Public School District. And I said, I didn't apply for it. Oh, well, we have you in the system. And I said, well, last year I applied for PPS pool, but not this year. And I said, matter of fact, I was told that they're going in a different direction. And she was like, well, we're switching that direction again. And then they said, would you be interested in that job? And I said, well, where is it? And they said, Jefferson High School. And I said, oh. And I paused because I had never worked at Jefferson High School. But I lived in the community, but I didn't know very much about Jefferson High School, except a lot of the rumors, things that would be on the news, and all of those things were actually all negative. And I'll never forget when I just said, okay, I guess I will interview for it. And I was like, how about next week? They were like, how about tomorrow? And I was like, ooh, okay. So, needless to say, I ended up at Jefferson High School. And I remember when I told family and friends that I got the job, I remember that this was the first time where I said I got the job, that the reaction of everyone that I told was different than what I've ever experienced when I said I got the job at Westview, or when I got the job at Centennial. It was like, oh, congratulations, that's so exciting. And even with the job that I'm now going to be transitioning into, which is at Clackamas High School in the Happy Valley in the school district, everyone was like, oh, that's so wonderful. Like, it was always so congratulatory when it was to the schools that they, in their minds, deemed as wonderful schools. But when I told, and this is family too, don't think this is just white people that said this. This was black people also saying. I said, I got a new job, you know, and they were like, oh, awesome, where are you going? And then I said, Jefferson High School. Crickets. It was a silence, right? And then I was like, hello, hello. And then it was like, you sure you want to go there? You know, and that's when I started to realize that even myself paused when the lady said Jefferson High School. But it paused because I did hear all the negativity, but I also did not really know the facts. So therefore, I did not make assumptions about what I've seen on the news, what I've heard from people, because I had never stepped foot in that building. So therefore, I decided that although I heard a lot of negative things, I needed to go for myself. I need to experience that for myself. And that's why when you start asking a lot of questions, you're gonna find out that that's gonna be the premise of a lot of my answer to how do we help. I don't care what you hear or what you think you know. Make sure that you're knowing for yourself, experience for yourself before you make decisions or judgments or assumptions about what you may not know or you think you know. And so I ended up at Jefferson, and needless to say, that was a whirlwind because I started in 2019, in the fall of 2019, and I'm all excited, things are going well. And then here comes halfway in the year, Kate Brown making that announcement a week before my daughter moved out and my other daughter gave birth to her firstborn child. And literally it was a week later, we went into shutdown. So I didn't even get to have the same experience as an administrator at Jefferson because now I'm moving into completely unknown territory, which our entire country and the world was experiencing. So that's a long answer, but I'm trying to make sure that you kind of understand my walk in my professional career.
Wow, thank you for that.
Were you at Jeff for 4 years?
I was at Jefferson for 4 years because this is the year that I now am transitioning to Clackamas High School.
So, what were some of your biggest surprises and impressions as you started at Jefferson, and especially in terms of what you thought you were going to see and what you turned out to see?
So one of the things that I would say that I experienced that I did not expect to experience was I'm the type of person that I can get along with anyone. It does not matter what your race is, what your gender is. I know how to get along with people. And the reason why is because building relationships is the very foundation of being able to navigate life in general. Because you will recognize that if you do not establish a relationship with somebody, then every interaction that you have with people, that lack of relationship is what sends the rest of those dynamics, interpersonal communications, conversations, whatever you have with that person changes based on either the relationship you have or the lack thereof of the relationship. And one thing that I experienced at Jeff that I had not experienced at any of the former schools was that you cannot establish yourself as someone who can make a difference in someone's life unless you started with building a relationship where they trust you. So in other schools, sometimes because of culture, so I want to make sure you understand, because of culture, as long as you were intelligent, you knew how to articulate, you could navigate some school districts. So I could navigate school districts based on my intelligence, my education, my title, right? But at Jefferson, that wasn't good enough. It didn't matter if I wore nice suits, it didn't matter if I knew how to articulate, it did not matter if I had a master's degree in education, it did not matter who I knew. What mattered was, did I know you? And that's what is with Jefferson High School. In that community, I had to make sure that I got to know them as students, I had to get to know them as staff, in order for them to even listen to whatever it is that I needed to do to fulfill my role and responsibilities as an administrator. And that was very different because I could be pleasant, do pleasantries, you know, when you meet somebody, hi, nice to meet you, and keep it pushing, and then rely on my education, my intelligence, and my skills to move forward. It was a dead stop when I was at Jefferson High School. I needed to know more about the students, the families, and where they came from in order for me to connect with them, in order for me to do my job. And so that is why that when you work at schools where there is a different culture and there is a different way of doing things, it changes who you are and how you interact, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't change who you are and you don't acclimate to that, then you find yourself in this continuously, because they feel like you don't get me. And if you don't get me, I could care less about your algebraic formulas. If you don't get me or understand where I'm coming from, I don't care about the US history and the, you know, all the things that you would learn in government and science. I don't have a TV. My mom doesn't watch politics. So therefore, you talking politics to me when you don't even know where I come from and where I'm about, then it created tension. So therefore, I was able to learn even more, because I already thought that I came to the table well prepared, because they came and sought me out anyway. So I didn't think I had anything to worry about. And then I learned a whole nother way of interacting. And I also want to bring up, I don't know who she was, but it was a young lady over here, and she said in the moment of silence when she spoke, and she said, she brought up a memory about that, that she realized that, you know, sometimes, you know, African Americans are loud and they really are celebratory, and this is how they, you know, worship. And she realized that that's when there was a disconnect, because who would want to come here when we don't do things the way they do things? And I really appreciated that, because I actually was thinking about that in the silence. I didn't say, she said it, but I actually thought it. And what I thought was, I would love to say this in response. And what I would like to say in response is, yes, African Americans, some African Americans like to celebrate, and some African Americans are very loud or do things very differently. But I would also say that I saw soul, because I, by the way, go to a church that is loud. We clap our hands, we stamp our feet, right? But there are moments that as an African American, I also just want to be in a reflective silence. And so I think that when we do things, we need to make sure that when we're talking about our cultures, that we keep in mind that African Americans are not a monolithic group. And what that means is we all don't think the same. We don't all want the same things. And I think that because there has been a monolithic experience among the African Americans because of their race, then people have now treated the entire African American experience as monolithic. But we are actually very different. So, you know, and in the same respect, I think we also need to keep in mind that white people are not monolithic. They are not all thinking one way. And I think that that's the problem. Both sides are not looking at all sides. And all sides means that we're all different, regardless of our skin color. We're different within the African American community. We have people that are highly educated in the African American community. We have people that are rich. Have you paid attention to Jay-Z and Beyonce? They're multi-billionaires. That doesn't fit the monolithic stereotype of all black people being in poverty. They are against that monolithic idea, right? Same thing with the white people. How many of you got money like Bill Gates? Not everyone, right? Not everyone has Bill Gates money, right? And so if we start to learn how to, because I wish I had some Bill Gates money. But again, we all, regardless of our race, have different ways of navigating our life, our culture. And if we start learning how to, as you stated in you said it's kind of ironic that we're talking about we're getting down to the basics and we're talking about why can't we just have a simple conversation. Well, Glenn Singleton said courageous conversations. We have conversations, but are they courageous? And courageous conversations are about having hard conversations while maintaining respect with whom we are engaging in a conversation with. So I can have a very different opinion from Daniel, but can we talk about it? But not only talk about it and not only listen, because I noticed some things that I noticed about Quaker, the lifestyle Quaker coming together as a community. African Americans come together as a community. We have more similarities than we have differences. But what tends to stand out to us is always the differences that are very different, right? I'll show you a difference. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah. That's different in the way I sung that. But the way that young lady played that piano, I was back there going, I was getting lost in the pianist. She was very different the way she played it, the way you should have saw her face, because I was watching her face, and she was like, bah, 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 bah. And then she went soft. I can't play like her. But it was beautiful. And I think if we learn how to embrace the beauty of the differences, and then in each of our different ways in how we come together and worship, we embed elements of all of those things. Because guess what? There are times when my pastor is hooping and hollering, and the Lord says, boom! You know, the music's going, but I got a migraine that day, and I'm not in the mood. And I'm wishing that he would just talk to us that day, right? And so there are times when he brings guest speakers because they have more of a talking way. I have a nephew, and when he speaks to our congregation, he doesn't hoop and holler. He just speaks, but he brings humor, and our audience loves it. It doesn't mean that they now no longer love my husband. We have to stop seeing things in a black and white world. It is not. I think that's the problem. Everything is this or it's that. You're a Republican or you're a Democrat. It's blue or it's green. It's white and so on. And so the world is not in two colors. And so we don't live our lives in two ways. And so the more we can think individually about my interaction with this one person, not this representative of an entire group. When you see me, see Candace. See Candace's experience. Don't see the entire Black population, because my experience is definitely not my daughter. Brittany, wave at everybody. Her experience is very different from mine, because I raised her differently than how my mother raised me. That's my mom. Wave, mother. So again, we all have different experiences. My mom has a very different story. Matter of fact, I told her story for my interview at Clackamas High School, because I wanted them to understand, because they asked me a question about equity. That's the new buzzword in education, talking about equity, right? And we always think that we can package something up and then spoon feed it to people. But really, you cannot package how to navigate racism. There is no one answer, one way to do it. Because it's very different depending on the person you're interacting with, depending on their story. My story is not your story. So therefore, my experience is not your experience. Therefore, how I respond is not going to be your response. And so if we can learn how to understand and just listen to the story behind the name, then maybe we can understand how to better communicate with Candace, because we understand her story.
Amen.
Thank you for that.
Wow.
I'm leading up to a question based on the last 4 years of your experience. So paint us a picture. Jefferson High School has been for some time traditionally the high school in the Portland district with the largest African American population. That is still the case and has been the case for some time. Is that correct?
I'm glad you asked that. So, here's some interesting dynamics. So first of all, let's talk about gentrification and redlining. So gentrification is when you have a community that lives in a particular area, and that area is usually, that community is usually majority of people of color, whether it's majority Hispanic or majority Asian or majority Black. In this instance, it was majority Black. Now, I don't assume that everyone knows the history, so I'm gonna give you a 30-second history of Portland, Oregon. And that history is when Black folks first came to Oregon, they came to Oregon where it was during a time where they said that Black people could only stay in this area. They were not allowed to live anywhere but in North, the inner, I'm gonna call it the inner because the outer was actually a suburb. So the area I live in used to not have any people of color in that area. So I'm gonna say the inner, North and Northeast Portland, which is Jefferson, all the way down to St. John's area. That was a designated area that our government said they were allowed to live. Why? Because it was not considered an area of worth, value, the land, okay? The houses, the land, it was depreciated. The value of the land and homes were all the way south of that. So the truth of the matter is, the families, when they would move here from different places, if they wanted to stay in the state of Oregon, and particularly in Portland, they were designated by the government that this is where you can be. Because there was a Vanport flood that was in Vancouver, Washington, where a lot of Black people were living. And when the flood hit, they had nowhere to live. They lost everything. So they all started wanting to come to Portland, Oregon. And they were like, whoa, we don't want all these Black people here. Well, they're coming. What do we do? So then that's when they came up with, okay, we're going to now say, here's the designated area that you're allowed to live in.